All right, so, last lecture I talked about, what arguments are. And for the next few lectures, I want to talk about how to evaluate arguments, how to see whether arguments are good or bad. And this kind of basic thing will be important because, we will look at different ethical theories and the arguments people make for those theories and against them, as well as the arguments those ethical theories will make for certain claims about ethical issues, right? So the first thing we need to do, though, is to talk about the different kinds of arguments. We're going to focus on deductive arguments in this class, but I think, it's good just to know what a deductive argument is. It's good to talk about the other kind of argument, right? So those who study logic and argument usually divide arguments into two types: deductive and inductive. Some people will divide them into more. Some people will say there are abductive arguments and conductive arguments. These claims are controversial, and more importantly, we just don't need to think about them for what we're going to do. Most people think that there are just deductive and inductive arguments. All right. So we're going to focus on deductive, but I think it's good to say a little bit about inductive arguments just so we can sort out inductive arguments from deductive, because inductive arguments are pretty common. They're pretty important and they're pretty interesting too. We're just not going to talk about them because we don't have time. Deductive are more important for what we want to do or what we need to do in this course. So an inductive argument, if the form of the argument is good and the premises are true, then the conclusion is probably true. An inductive argument, no matter how good it is, all it can ever show you is that the premises are likely to be true. Now, you might wonder, I say, well, form, what do I mean by that? The form of the argument, which we'll talk about a lot, is the way the premises of an argument fit together to support the conclusion. The content is what the premises actually say, right? You might think of this, and I think this is often a helpful way to think of arguments. You might think of it as a building, right? We're building something, we build these premises, we want them to support this conclusion. Well, the form of the argument's sort of the blueprint, the plan, the way we put the stuff together. The content is the stuff we actually make the argument out of, right? We'll talk more about this. To have a good argument, whether deductive or inductive, your form and your content both need to be good, right? Think about building again. If you have a garbage plan, it doesn't matter how good your materials are, the thing's going to fall down. It's not going to support any weight. By the same token, you can have a great plan, but if you try to build your building out of cardboard, it's probably not going to support a lot of weight, right? Anyway, that'll be important, so just keep it in mind. But anyway, here's an example of an inductive argument. I've seen 10 students of X Academy, fill in whatever name you want, and they've all been boys. I don't know, fill in whatever situation this person just meets randomly students at this school. So X Academy is probably an all-boys school, right? If you just met 10 random students from a school and they were all boys, you'd think, well, there's a good chance all, or at least most of the students at this school are boys, right? But you couldn't be sure, right? There might be some weird reason. Maybe it's half girls, half boys, and just for whatever reason, you've only met boys, right? Maybe they're all coming out of the boys' gym class, right? Who knows, right? The point is, premise supports you to think likely an all-boys school, but you can't be sure. Here's another example. Over 10,000 people have taken this drug, Dactocin, and none have had a serious side effect. There's actually a website that will make up a drug name for you if you want. That's what I used here. So Joe probably won't have a serious side effect from Dactocin, right? Like, no drug in the real world is actually this safe, right? But imagine the drug were this safe. Like, we give it to 10,000 people and none of them have a serious side effect. Well, it's probably safe for Joe, right? But Joe might be Mr. Unlucky 10,001 who's just going to get floored by this stuff, right? It's not likely, but it is possible. So inductive arguments are common in medicine, science, finance, and I have to say it because it's true, gambling, right? You know, among other places, right? Now, one thing I want to say before we kind of leave inductive arguments behind for the most part is probably true can mean very, very likely indeed, right? People have a bad habit to say, well, inductive arguments, they might be, they might be false. Aren't they inferior to, deductive arguments for reasons we'll get into? And they're not, right? For one thing, in a lot of cases, inductive is going to be the best you can do, right? But also a really good inductive argument might show you that the conclusion is really, really, really likely to be true. 99%, that would still be an inductive argument. But even if it's 99% or more, there's still some chance the premises could be true and the conclusion false. A small one, but a chance. So we're not going to talk much about inductive arguments. For doing moral philosophy, for doing ethics, I think deductive arguments are going to be more useful. Deductive arguments are also easier to evaluate for reasons we'll also get into. The big one being that inductive arguments, to evaluate them, you need a bit more math. If you're interested, Jonathan Weisberg, a professor at the University of Toronto, has this really, really good book on inductive logic, inductive arguments, odds and ends. It's really, really good, and it's also free, right? Like I said, you'll have to use a little bit of math. You'll have to do some fractions, multiplying and dividing fractions. If you're interested in inductive arguments and you're up for that kind of thing, I can't recommend Weisberg's book enough. Anyway, as interesting as they are, we will now leave inductive arguments behind. Deductive arguments are common in mathematics. In fact, they're pretty much the bread and butter of mathematics. But you'll also see them a lot in law as well as philosophy, among some other places, right? Now, when the form of a deductive argument is good, when the premises support the conclusion in the right way, we will say that the deductive argument is valid. Now, valid is another specialized term. In the same way that we use argument in kind of a specialized way, we also use valid in a specialized way, right? In ordinary life, you might say, well, that's a valid point, meaning, no, that's a pretty good point. You might even say, well, that's a valid argument, meaning, okay, I think that's a pretty good argument. That's not the way we use the term in philosophy. It's not the way you use the term in mathematics either. What we mean by valid is something much more specialized. So when we talk about valid in this class, keep in mind the specialized meaning. To say that a deductive argument is valid means that if the premises are true, then the conclusion cannot possibly be false. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Here's a valid deductive argument. It's a really boring one, but whatever. All dogs are mammals. Moxie is a dog, so Moxie is a mammal, right? If it is really true that all dogs are in fact mammals, every single dog is a mammal, by definition a dog is a mammal, right? And Moxie is a dog, then Moxie must also be a mammal, right? I should probably give you guys a picture. Moxie is actually a dog. Moxie's my dog. Just a little Beagle Jack Russell mix, right? This is a valid deductive argument. Here's an invalid deductive argument. All dogs are mammals. Moxie is a mammal, so Moxie is a dog. Well, why is this invalid, right? Remember, for an argument to be valid, it can't be possible that the premises are true and the conclusion false. Well, look, there's all sorts of ways that these premises could be true and this conclusion could be false, right? All dogs are mammals, that's whatever. That's definitely true. But think about this, right? Cats are mammals, right? If Moxie were a cat, she would still be a mammal, right? Human beings are mammals. If Moxie were a person, personally, I think Moxie would be a weird name for a person, but whatever. To each his own, right? You know, if somebody named their baby Moxie, Moxie would still be a mammal. She wouldn't be a dog, though, right? She could be a gerbil. She could be, I don't know. Fill in random mammal here, right? Moxie could be like a platypus, right? The weirdest of all mammals. It would still be true all dogs are mammals. It would still be true that she is a mammal, but it would not be true she's a dog, right? You can imagine ways premises true and conclusion false. That's what it means to say a deductive argument is not valid or invalid. Now, one point here that I want to really emphasize. I mean, I would bang the table, but I'm sitting at my computer and have a glass of water next to it, so I'm not going to bang the table for theatrical effect and spill water all over my laptop. But invalid deductive arguments are always bad arguments. If a deductive argument is invalid, you don't need to go any further. You can tell this is not a good argument. But a valid deductive argument is not necessarily a good one. Invalid deductive arguments are always bad, but saying that an argument is valid is not enough to show that it is a good argument. Why is that? Think about the definition of valid arguments for a second, right? Valid means if premises are true, conclusion must be true as well. Well, so how could it be the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true? How could it be the case that that wouldn't be convincing, that it wouldn't show you that the conclusion is in fact true, right? Because a good argument is supposed to show us that this conclusion is true or give us reason to think it's true, right? Well, look. Saying that an argument is valid only tells us that if the premises are true, the conclusion can't be false. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true as well. But saying that an argument is valid does not tell us whether the premises are actually true. A valid argument with false premises is still a bad argument. To be a good argument, a deductive argument must be what we call sound. Sound equals the argument is valid and the premises are true, or at the very least, very plausible. We'll talk more about what we mean by plausible in a few lectures when we talk about the burden of proof and some other issues like that. Here is a deductive argument that is valid, but unsound. All dogs are smart. Moxie is a dog. Therefore, Moxie is smart. Well, why is this unsound? Because one of the premises is false, right? Which premise is false? Number one, all dogs are smart. Plenty of dogs are not smart. Plenty of dogs, however you define smart, are pretty stupid. Sadly, Moxie is one of those dogs that is in fact pretty stupid. I love her. She's cute. She's not a clever animal. If these premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true as well. But at least one of them, premise 1, is false. Sadly, not all dogs are smart. Because one premise is false, even though it's valid, it's not sound. All right. Keep this stuff about validity and soundness in mind. It's tricky, but it's really important, which is a way of kind of hinting to you guys, and I'll just come right out and say it now, that it will also be on a test.